Zac Galibov. With my school, Yavneh College, I recently went to Poland with 100 other students for 5 days to deepen our understanding of the Holocaust. We were able to visit the places where once our ancestors stood in persecution. We had heard about these places so much, seen them in so many pictures, but it is so very different from the real thing. So I'm here today to share my experience with you. We started off our trip in the Warsaw Cemetery, a cemetery crammed with graves that had become so overcrowded during World War II that they resorted to digging a mass grave. But initially, I didn't realise this. All I saw was an open space covered in snow. Little did I know that almost 700 Jews, young and old, were piled underneath the ground around which we were standing. We proceeded on to the last remaining section of the Warsaw Ghetto Wall. What really struck me was not the wall that had trapped so many Jews, or the wall that so many Jews had snuck by to smuggle in food and Jewish ornaments, but the modern flats that stood adjacent to this wall, flats with a Christmas tree still in their window. And I wondered if these people, so close to the remains of the ghetto, ever understood what this wall represented. As we learnt about the ghetto uprising, we ended the day standing on top of the Miller 18 bunker, where the last fighters were left. I heard how the Jews had found refuge in this bunker, but then the Nazis discovered them. The Germans gassed the bunker, but still some survived. There was clearly no way out, so they took their own lives. They believed so strongly in what they were fighting for, that they were prepared to pay the ultimate sacrifice, to fight for the freedom of the Jewish people. I therefore felt proud to stand on top of where they had sacrificed, in the centre of Warsaw, in the centre of what once was the ghetto, and have the freedom to sing Adon Olam. It was often hard to connect to something that happened so many years ago, when all we could really see were memorials and graves. However, while standing in the Umschlagplatz, the courtyard where Warsaw Jews were deported to Treblinka, just on the other side of the courtyard was the Nazi SS building, and on top stood 5 poles, the flagpoles that used to hold up 5 Nazi flags. It suddenly seemed so real. The next day, we drove to Treblinka. The first thing I saw was the elevated platform, the remnants of the train station. We stood in between this platform and the ominous, imposing stone piece of the gas chamber. The distance of the straight path between these two were less than 50 meters. How short their time must have been. When they left Warsaw, they were promised a new, better life. But 50 meters away from where they would have stood is where they would die. I walked in the same path where these Jews on the way to their death had walked, and placed my feet where theirs would have been. It was so hard for me to think that if I had been born just 18 years earlier, their fate would have been mine. Surrounding the gas chamber were stones, each representing an entire community that had been lost to this camp. Just one stone to represent not one person, but an entire community of individuals, different people with different ambitions, remembered by just one stone, a stone among hundreds of others. Around the gas chamber we stood, singing the Shema. At first, our voices were quiet, but soon we sung louder and louder. I could hear our voices echoing off the trees around the camp. The same words that those Jews may have recited those 70 years ago, even though they were walking to their deaths. I hope they had faith that one day the Jewish nation would survive, and that one day Jews would be able to come back to the very spot where they had died and continue to sing the Shema on their behalf. On the way back, we stopped off by the side of the road and walked deep into the forest late at night. Soon we reached a small clearing. We stood around a fenced-off area of snow. This was another mass grave. We lit candles by the side and heard how the Jews were shot and then thrown into this pit. Many still alive, but too weak to climb out of this grave. People drive down that road every single day, but had we not stopped, there was no way I would have known of this example of bitter cruelty. Even if I had stood in this forest, had there been no railings, I would not have known. Yet beneath the earth lay the remains of an entire community. Those Jews marched down the same path we did in rows of 4. So we marched away from the mass grave in rows of 4 and onwards towards the rest of our lives. In the pitch black, in the middle of a dense forest, on the outskirts of Warsaw, 100 young Jews with Israeli flags draped around their backs held their heads high and sang the song of the Jewish people, the HaTikvah. We heard so many stories of pain and anguish, but one that stood out for me was in the Bushey labor camp. The infants were taken from their parents and killed as they watched helplessly. Later that day, while walking with my arms around 2 of my closest friends, I was struck with the realization that those infants would never have the chance to experience a moment like that. Auschwitz I did not strike me as a concentration camp. On the outside, all I saw were red brick houses. It was hard to imagine the horrors that must have taken place inside those buildings. Inside contained possessions of over 1 million Jews, with massive piles of shoes, each pair representing a different individual. I looked at the shoes I was wearing that day and thought how that's all I would be remembered by. That's all that I would be. Probably the most striking part of the Holocaust are the gas chambers. But to actually stand inside one compares to nothing else. Up to now, we have seen the places where people have died, but we have never stood in the exact spot where they perished. I could not bring myself to consider how for my ancestors, this would have been the last place they stood, that this was the end of the road for them, and that they would not have been able to walk out the door to the left of me. Surrounding us on the walls of the gas chamber were white jagged lines, scratch marks. I could imagine the Jews clawing for life on the walls, trying to escape, but to no avail. Yet right outside that gas chamber were houses, a busy road, a petrol station, all within view of where we stood. It made me angry to think how such monstrosities could occur so close to civilization. Birkenau was very different. We saw the cramped living conditions, the bunks where they would sleep 10 across, and I just thought back to going home to sleep in my own bed, in my own room, with blankets and pillows, and just how vastly different our lives were. Birkenau was on a scale too large to comprehend. We entered into the women's camp. This, I thought, was the entire camp, but to our right were the main railway tracks. I stood speechless as I saw, past these railway tracks, rows and rows of barracks stretching further than the eye could see. And right at the back of the camp were the remains of the gas chambers. All 4 gas chambers within 100 meters of each other, where 1.1 million Jews from all across Europe perished in such a small area. We formed a large circle in between the destroyed gas chambers, swaying side to side, singing the HaTikvah, praying in the name of all our lost ancestors. As a group of Polish tourists were forced to walk around us, I sang louder. We, the Jews, were making our presence known. We, the descendants of those who died around where we were standing, are still here and are proud to be here. We then left the camp, something those Jews never had the chance to do. We marched down those railway tracks between the barracks, not sad about how much we have lost, but proud that the Nazis did not win. We held our heads high, because by us being here, by Jews visiting this place, we have defeated Hitler's plan. We left Auschwitz, a place where 1.1 million Jews were murdered, crying out that the Jewish people are still here. Being here today, the freedom we have is down to the sacrifice those 6 million Jews made 70 years ago. We have a duty to continue on with the Jewish nation so that their suffering was not in vain. We have a duty to spread and educate others on the Holocaust so that we can prevent anything like it from happening ever again. I will finish with a quote that our teachers told us at the end of our trip. A quote that completely sums up why Holocaust education is so important. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Thank you.